Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Royal Instinct. Today, we're going to be looking into a couple of videos about how private equity is destroying football, how the Premier League is at risk, and what the future of football will look like. Why we find ourselves in a current state where people are calling football boring, and why many people are saying that the current Premier League is the worst, most boring um, season so far in the Premier League, and how private equity is the cause of this. Many people are saying that Arsenal are a very boring team to watch. They sit currently top of the Premier League. They are champions elect. They are looking like that they will win the Premier League for the first time in over 2 decades. And many pundits are blaming Arsenal. Many pundits are blaming the tactics Arteta used. However, what you have to understand is that the tactics Arteta is using is it's not the cause. It is a symptom of the situation that he finds himself in, the situation of the current Premier League. Most Premier League teams are setting up very defensively sound, very defensively strong. They are hard to break down because these teams do not want to concede goal, concede points. It is a strategy used all across the league to be risk averse. And many people are blaming the current managers and tactics, but people aren't going deeper and beyond why this is happening, and how did the ownership structure of many clubs is the reason for this less entertaining brand of football being played at the moment. There is private equity within private equity investment in the Premier League. The Premier League is the most lucrative league all across Europe, all across the world, and private equity is trying to get part of the profits. It is in there to make a profit off the backs of all the hard work that the football clubs in the Premier Division have garnered. And many people they are in the league, they are investing into the league to make a profit, to drive a profit. And one of the reasons is when private equity enters a market, it wants to reduce risks, it wants to maximize this profitability. And if you can finish higher up the table, if you can drop less points against the opposition, you're more likely to get a higher position in the league, and therefore more likely to get more money and possibly gain entry into European competitions, the Champions League being the most lucrative, which is why many people are fighting for that top 4 spot. I think the Premier League gets 5 Champions League spots at the moment, but they're trying to be part of that so that they can get that extra revenue and the extra attention and eyeballs it gets by being part of that league. So many managers are being more risk averse because they are afraid of losing. They don't have that freedom to go out and entertain because it is all about points and league position. And the statistical models used by private equity, the data analysts employed by these owners, they drive a incentive to reduce chances being conceded, which is why many teams are forming a low block and sitting back and not allowing the opposition to score. But let's jump straight into this first video.
This one. Take a look at this graphic showing the teams in the top 5 leagues this season. The clubs in yellow are the ones that have minority or majority investment from private equity companies. 15 of them are yellow. If you look closely, you'll see that one of the leagues are yellow too. We'll get into that later. How on earth has this happened, and why are private equity companies rushing to get a slice of European football? More importantly, what impact does this have on our beautiful game, and how does this affect us, the fans? I'm Jordan, and today, along with research from Harry Bush, we're going to explore this from 3 different perspectives. The private equity companies themselves, our clubs, and I'll save us, the fans, to the very end. But first, it's worth understanding the private equity success stories. Does it work? Well, I've got 2 private equity exits for you. In 2014, KKR took a 9.7% stake in German club Hertha Berlin for 61 million euros. Over the next 3 years, they increased their stake to just under 37%. They steadied the ship, Hertha Berlin got better, and in 2018, the club bought back KKR's stake for a modest profit for the private equity company. More recently, and in the same year, Elliott took over AC Milan.
So already you are seeing a strategy being employed where they want to make an initial investment and quickly get their money back out by selling off their shares, by selling off their ownership within the club at a profit. So they are incentivized to come in, invest their money, and then when the value of the club goes up by its success on the pitch, then they are willing to get back out. So it is all about profit in the short term. It is all about making a quick buck, getting in and out of the market.
After Chinese entrepreneur owner Li Yonghong missed a payment of 300 million euros. That was a crazy story. They too steadied the ship. AC Milan won the league a few years later. And then Redbird came and bought AC Milan for 1.2 billion euros in 2022, just 4 years later. Yes, that is a 4x profit in just 4 years. A sizable return for Elliott. You see, this is what private equity houses do. Typically speaking, they buy distressed assets, streamline them operationally and financially, implement a culture of growth, and then sell them for a healthy profit, usually in a target time frame of 5 to 7 years.
So they are not there for the long term. They are not there for the impact on the communities of the football club. They are just in and out to make that football club a success and bring about a profit for themselves.
And with European football, as you're about to see, there is a healthy amount of opportunity for them to do that. I write about things like this every week. It's a reeling from the decisions made 4 years ago in that year. Private equity companies were watching and swirling like vultures. Many of them pounced. They were taking advantage of clubs in dire need of some capital. On top of that comes the growth potential. If you think about it, broadcast rights have been going up and to the right.
Because people are more indoors, because people are watching football at larger scale, the Premier League TV deal is the most profitable TV deal in the world. It is generating 6.7 billion for, I believe, 3 years. And that money is divided up between the 20 clubs in the Premier League each season, which is why the Premier League has the most money. It is the richest league, and therefore the richest clubs in the world, barring Bayern Munich, Real Madrid and Barcelona, PSG, are all located in the Premier League.
For many years now, when the prominent source of income for football clubs has been growing so aggressively and so consistently, it makes for an attractive proposition for many private equity companies. Thirdly, though, and in my opinion more importantly, European football assets are cheap and they have little regulation. The NFL...
So one of these strategies used by private equity for investing into, European leagues, not counting the Premier League at the moment, is because if they can make players appear to be superstars, appear to be good players, then they can sell those players at a profit, at a premium to the Premier League. And that is why at the moment the structure of the European football looks like most teams are feeder clubs for the Premier League to come in and buy their players.
And private equity participation in ownership for decades until last month. And even though they finally let private equity companies invest in NFL teams, there's still a lot of rules around them. Look at this graphic on the right-hand side to see some of the rules. The interesting one there, the max amount that they can...
The NFL understands that allowing private equity to come into the NFL will dilute the long-term quality of the league because of their short-term insight that they bring. It allows for short-term decision being the driver of the decisions that they make, and therefore long-term and sustainability wise it is not a good look. But let's jump into the other video also discussing private equity.
Chelsea Football Club was acquired by a consortium of investors led by Todd Boehly. Since buying the club, it's deteriorated. Chelsea finished in 12th place in the 2022-23 season. To make matters worse, the club are currently mid-table in the Premier League. All of this.
So obviously this is a little bit older, this video, because Chelsea are doing, I think they're in 5th at the moment, this year, 2026.
Despite spending over $1 billion in transfers. Not all in one go, by the way. This is done on a buy now, pay later basis, as discussed in my video, which you can find here.
And it is funny that he mentions buy now, pay later, because that is how it seems the world is going. Even when it comes to if you're buying stuff on Uber Eats or Deliveroo or DoorDash in America, you have the option to buy on credit. You get to buy a fast food meal, a pizza, a burger on credit. That is not a good, sustainable way for you to live your life. That is not a great way for you to be financially responsible. And these big private equity firms like Chelsea are making use of future earnings, the ability to pay back in the future to bring short-term profit to themselves now.
Here, the team is now mediocre at best. Revenues have declined and costs have increased. As a result, shareholder value and fan satisfaction are both positively correlated, but for the wrong reasons. Moving up north, in December 2020, ALK acquired Burnley Football Club using a leveraged buyout. Since acquiring the club, Burnley has been relegated from the Premier League and then promoted.
So many of these private equities are using leverage to buy these clubs, which then the club is then the owner of the debt. And by the revenue it produces, it is paying off the debt. So you see already how many clubs aren't incentivized to play risky football, to play full-on attacking football, because that can leave you open at the other end where you can concede goals and lose a game in essence. Whereas if you are more defensively solid and then nick a point here, there, and stay in the Premier League, you're more likely to get that consistent revenue coming back to you so that you can pay off the debt that you acquired to gain the club. And then with inflation, with the growing interest in the Premier League, the valuations of the club will keep increasing. So these clubs aren't incentivizing themselves to take risks and go on to win the league unless you're part of the big 6 established clubs already. You know, if you're a Brighton, if you're a Burnley, if you're one of these, smaller clubs with a smaller fan base, you're more encouraged to just, be a mid-table club so that you can keep churning, so that you can keep being a beneficiary of the Premier League and its extreme revenues. And Chelsea's model, what I believe what they are doing is, because the way that Todd Bowley and, Clear Group, I believe they're called, how they acquired Chelsea Football Club is because Roman Abramovich, the previous owner, had to sell off his asset because of the whole Russia invasion of Ukraine. There was a not tariff, there was a what's the word? Anyway, he basically sanctioned, that's the word. Yeah, there was a sanction placed on him and that he had to sell off all his assets then. But basically the British government seized Chelsea Football Club and then sold it. I believe the club was worth 2 billion at the time, 2-3 billion, and they bought it at a cheaper discounted price. And what I believe that Todd Bowley and his equity team are trying to do is they are going to hold it for 4 or 5 years and then sell it at a profit to another buyer. That's why they're invested into these young players who, as they progress and get older, that their valuation will go up so that they can sell them off on a profit. Their wages are spread over big contracts, 7 years contracts, where they have to pay low wages at the moment, and basically the money that they use to buy the club is being paid off with the revenue that the club generates. So these owners are basically using other people's money to position themselves in a way that in 4 or 5 years time that they get a big payout.
Back to the Premier League, but it looks like the club will be relegated again in the 2023-24 season. The fans, however, may not necessarily be mad at ownership, and this is because the bar for Burnley is relatively low. Simply playing Premier League football is what a Burnley fan needs to be relatively happy.
And that is where incentives are aligned. If Burnley just want to be in the Premier League and the fans are happy for them to just be in the best league and not go back down to the Championship, but then also not go on to get a European spot, to get a potential, to build themselves up to they can launch a title charge to win the Premier League. They're just happy being in the Premier League. So the fans are happy and the owners are happy because by being in the Champions League, they are generating a big number, a large amount of revenue for themselves where they pay off the debts and then are pocketing small amounts of profit.
If a Burnley fan expects to go to Champions League games, then it's safe to say that this fan is potentially delusional. I mean, it is Burnley after all. As long as the club can maintain Premier League status, then the fans ought to be satisfied. That being said, what does it mean for the shareholders? And are they going to realise value from Burnley? The response to that is twofold. In the short term, no. However, in the long term, assuming the club stabilises itself as a Premier League contender, revenues are increased and costs are managed well, then
that's what they want. They want to run a sustainable business. They want them to be in the Premier League so that they are in a position to get the large revenues that the Premier League can produce for them. They manage a small size squad that can just barely survive relegation so that they can keep competing. So then their expenditure stays small. So they're incentivized to basically run it as a profitable club. So that season, and you saw the pictures there, Vincent Kompany was the manager of Burnley. And he tried to play a expansive style of football and attacking style of football, and that got them relegated. So now that they've got Scott Parker, who is trying, who I believe has been told to play a more defensively structured brand of football, and I believe it's not working either because they have not invested into a squad that is capable of staying in the Premier League. They're trying to do it on the cheap and they're not reaping the rewards. Yeah, I just checked now. So Burnley is 19th at the moment with 13 games to go. It looks like they're going to be relegated again. So, unless you invest enough money to become a Premier League side with the Premier League quality players, you're going to keep being this yo-yo club. Whereas Burnley want to just establish themselves as a Premier League mid-table club so that they can keep getting that excess revenue.
Perhaps. Moving over to France, the acquisition of Bordeaux in 2018 was another example of a private equity takeover. GACP and King Street Capital bought the club with monies borrowed from Fortress, secured.
So again, it's the same playbook. Again, these private equity companies are borrowing money to then make the purchase in the hopes of making a profit on their asset as inflation increases, as the profitability of the league increases, that when they do sell it off, that they sell it off for a profit
against the club's assets. Post acquiring.
And the biggest example of that is if you look at Manchester United, the Glazers bought Manchester United, the most profitable club in the world, one of the biggest clubs in the world, and then they have run it. That they borrowed so much money to purchase it. They're still paying off that debt, and then they're not incentivizing themselves to carry on winning leagues, which is why you've seen this demise and short-term strategy thinking, which has allowed Man United to not really launch a title charge post Alex Ferguson.
Bordeaux, things went from bad to worse. The new owners began to sell players with any prospect of a successful future.
Yeah, so they're selling off these players because they believe that they can make a profit on them. It's all about balancing the balance sheet for these people. They don't care about the fans. They don't care about the state that they will leave the club once they sell off their shares in the club. They have a short-term strategy mindset.
Namely, Malcolm, Jules Koundé, and Adam Ounas. Ironically, these were the sorts of players that could have helped the club remain competitive. But the short-sighted nature of
So when you have owners coming into a club and they don't really care about being competitive, but just staying in the league, you know, you're never going to take that risk to play expansive football, to play attractive football, and you will be going in with a defensively minded attitude, and that feeling or that insight, that attitude trickles down to the managers, who then are afraid to lose their jobs because they just want to steady the ship and not rock the boat too much, and therefore they end up playing defensively minded football, because it is a don't lose mentality.
Liverpool, who currently sit 4th in the Premier League, are only 13 points ahead of Nottingham Forest, who are all the way in 17th. A pretty small margin
So this video is going to explain about the Premier League and what's happening tactics-wise.
for such a big gap in the table, but it gets a bit crazier. If we take Brentford in 7th on 30 points and look at Palace all the way down in 14th, there's only a 3-point gap. 3 points. That's one game. Palace beat Villa in their next game, and they could potentially move 7 places. And we're over halfway through the season. The Prem is as competitive as ever, and this is just one of the main reasons.
And one of the reasons the Premier League is competitive as ever is because of the heavy investment that Premier League clubs are able to do. They're able to go abroad to Italian leagues, French leagues, German leagues, and bring over high quality players for cheap, because the wages that Premier League clubs can offer a player compared to what their European counterparts can do, they aren't able to match it unless you are someone like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, PSG, and I believe Inter currently would fall into that category as well.
It's the best league in the world, right? I mean, if we look at all of the big leagues across Europe, each one has 1 or 2 teams that dominate each year. France has PSG, Germany has Bayern, Spain have Barca and Madrid. In theory, the Premier League's always been classed as the exception, but the last 8 titles in England were won by the same 2 teams, and in 6 of those 8 years, it was City. So how can we call this the best, most competitive league in the world, but then discredit other leagues for the exact same thing? The Prem is comfortably the richest commercial league in the world. It attracts the best players and coaches, and it's in a league of its own in a financial sense. But is the skill gap between the Prem and the other leagues really that big? In modern history, English teams haven't exactly dominated European competitions.
One reason for English teams not dominating the European competition is because the league is so competitive and takes so much out of you each and every game in the Premiership, that by the time you come to the latter stages of the Champions League, of European tournaments, you are already tired. Whereas like PSG, who are easily the best team in France, half the time they're just playing without any pressure, without any jeopardy, without any risk, because there's such a big mismatch between the quality of the opposition that they face. And the same can be said about Spanish opposition, the Spanish league, the German league. The Italian league is quite competitive right now, and you can see that by the number of different teams that have won the Serie A in the last few years. Whereas, in the Premier League, if you're Man City, you can't afford. Sometimes it goes down to the last day of the league for you to win the Premiership. So, British clubs, English clubs do prioritize the Premier League over the Champions League because of the competitive nature within the league.
Often beaten by the best teams from other leagues. Last season, PSG beat basically every good Premier League side on their way to the Champions League. So why do so many people, footballers included, regard the Prem as the undisputed best? It might be because the Premier League will always have something that other leagues don't, and something that other leagues never will. And it's yet again reminding us of why the English top flight is the pinnacle of world football. At the end of last season, Opta updated their advanced power ranking metric that ranked over 10,000 teams on a scale from 0 to 100. The metric is calculated using over 2.5 million games, combining match outcomes, league and nationality, and quality of result to get an accurate representation of how good a team is. And while this is a great way to compare clubs, it's also a great way to compare leagues. If we look at the graphic for the 2024-25 season, 2 things stand out. Firstly, the best Premier League clubs are the best clubs in the world. Yes, I know PSG won the Champions League, and they're duly credited for their unbelievable season in the rankings. But Liverpool, Arsenal and City were 3 of the best 5 teams in the world. In fact, only 10 teams achieved a ranking of above 95, and half of them were in the Prem. It's weird to think that Brighton are currently the 15th best team in the world right now, as they only sit 10th in the league table. But if you don't want to trust the numbers too much, the eye test backs it up. PSG did get the better of Liverpool, Villa and Arsenal last season on their way to winning.
Yeah, and I would say a big reason for that is because PSG, they were able to rest and rotate their squad compared to, because they're guaranteed to win the league, right? Their squad, the quality that they got is just so much further ahead than its counterparts within the league that they're able to do that. Whereas, Liverpool, Aston Villa and Arsenal will have to field this best 11 every single game because they want to, be competitive, get that European spot. They also want to win the Champions League, but it's just not a priority as much as it is to finish in the top 4 for those clubs because they want to gain that revenue
in the Champions League, but all 3 ties were extremely tight. Spurs and United had dreadful seasons in the league, but both comfortably made the Europa League final. Chelsea weren't amazing in the league either, but still won the Conference League. Even Newcastle and Palace finished 5th and 12th, but still won domestic trophies. And this leads on to the second point, parity. The Premier League peaks slightly higher than the other top 4 leagues in Europe, but its average is where it really stands out. Looking back at the graphic, we can see that the spread between the best and worst teams in a league is much smaller in the Prem compared to the other 4 leagues. Like, much smaller. According to the metric, Sunderland, the statistically worst side in the league before this season started, are at a similar level to the lower mid-table sides in Serie A and the Bundesliga.
And I think you're going to see over the next couple of years, British clubs really dominate the lesser European competitions, such as the Europa League and the Conference League. You already seen West Ham and Chelsea both win the Conference League, and Tottenham last year won the Europa League, and I believe Nottingham Forest or Aston Villa will win the European League again this season, and potentially you can have a British English club winning the Champions League. But another reason for the success of these teams in the Europa League, especially, is because when the changing of the rules, of the format of the Champions League, where the teams from the group stages now don't drop into the Europa League spots, has really allowed those English teams to do well in that competition.
Next worst teams, Burnley and Wolves, would theoretically compete for Europe in La Liga and even have a long shot at second in Liga. And if we change the teams to their league average, for example, this is where we can really see the levels. Only 1.5 metric points separate the league average between the 2nd and 5th best leagues in the world. 5.7 metric points separate first from second. The average Premier League club is considerably better than the average La Liga club, Serie A club. You get the point. But while we'll never get a flawless performance indicator in football, regardless of how advanced the statistics become, this seems to be aging extremely well. La Liga is the consensus next best league in football, with many people.
And another thing is that because English clubs have the financial power to buy most players from across the continent, from other clubs that can't afford to pay those wages, and because it is a statistically analytical driven game now, they are purchasing players who are physically ready for the Premier League, who are good at sprints, good at running. They're looking at literally the most physical players across Europe and bringing them down. They're not picking them based on skill. It is more of the physical attributes that they can bring. And then naturally, if you have less flair players in the league, less actual football players and more of just athletes, then you are going to get this situation where tactics become more about not losing possession, not losing the ball, defending well and not conceding goals, rather than waiting for a bit of creativity or brilliance to unlock a defense.
People believing it actually trumps the Prem with its historic dominance in the Champions League. And to be fair, clubs like Real Madrid and Barcelona have peaked as high as football clubs can really peak. But in the competition this season, Premier League teams have won 9 out of 10 of their matchups with their Spanish opposition. Liverpool are in one of the worst runs of form in their club's recent history and still managed to beat Real Madrid. City did the same, Arsenal destroyed Atleti and Bayern, and even Spurs and Newcastle, who have both struggled in the league, managed to cruise past Villarreal and Bilbao. But even though Arsenal are favourites, there's still a good chance the eventual Champions League winner won't be an English club, but I think I know why. A great example is the Arsenal versus PSG tie in the Champions League last year. We know that PSG beat Arsenal.
I reckon he's going to say to the point that I made earlier that Arsenal aren't able to rotate its squad
And went on to win the tournament. But I want to know what kind of situation each team was in leading up to the fixture. So let's look at PSG, rated around 97.5 on the Opta ranking. The 3 games they played in and around the tie with Arsenal were against Nice, Strasbourg and Montpellier. They had already mathematically won Ligue 1 nearly 4 weeks prior, and their primary focus was obviously the Champions League.
I think I know what the solution will be for English teams about the problem that he's going to highlight, but let's let him finish first.
Arsenal were rated about 98.75, and they played Palace, Bournemouth and Liverpool. And whilst the title was out of reach, they were still battling to keep their place in the top 4 to guarantee Champions League football next season.
So English teams have to go all out to get that top 4 spot, even at the expense of a Champions League knockout, basically knocked out in the Champions League. So, you know, they are more incentivized to bring in that revenue continuously rather than go for glory and go all out on attack.
PSG were undoubtedly in a much more comfortable position. So let's look at the difficulty of games they played to really see how fair the metric is across the leagues. PSG played Nice, who were rated at an 85.4, Strasbourg at an 86.3, and Montpellier at a 77.2. Arsenal, on the other hand, played a Palace team that were ranked at 91.2, Bournemouth at a 90.5, and Liverpool at 100. In the 3 games around the tie, Arsenal played an average rating of 93.9, whereas similarly ranked PSG played a team average of 83. So while PSG did deserve to beat Arsenal, you do have to put it into context with the strength of their schedule.
This is what I mean. Those clubs are able to rotate and keep their squad fresh, keep the players fresh, keep the best players ready for the big prize in the European competition.
PSG had basically nothing to worry about in the league. Even if they hadn't already sealed first place, they were leaving London to play a team ranked 376th in the world. That would be like Alcaraz winning a Grand Slam and then having to play Paul Jubb in the next few days. You probably don't even know who that is. In fact, you definitely don't know who that is. Meanwhile, Arsenal had to worry about the eventual league winners and the eventual FA Cup winners. It's almost no wonder that English teams struggle to go all the way in the Champions League. And funnily enough, when they do, they rarely actually win any other trophies that year. I'm sure if you switch Arsenal and PSG's situations last season, Arsenal might have had a much better chance of getting their first Champions League trophy.
And now to combat that, what the English teams are doing, they are building larger and larger squads because first of all, they have the financial muscle to be able to get the players to build such a squad, and which is why you're seeing Arsenal's favourites for the Premier League because it just has the strongest squad within the league. So that when they do rotate players, their results and their performance is not impacted by a drop in quality of the players within its squad. They, you know, if you take out Saka, who's Arsenal best right winger, but you know, in comes Madueke, who is a Premier League proven winger. The drop off is minimal, and that is one way how the English teams will be managing both the European competitions and the Premier League by having much better squads, not even just the first 11, but all 25, 26 players being able to be rotated in and out to win both prizes.
But I guess we'll never know. Funnily enough, not one of the 6 games that either club played in and around their tie were won by either team. Were that PSG team actually as good as they seemed?
And you know, PSG didn't win any of their ties around that fixture, but still went on to win the French league, Ligue 1, which just shows you that the strength of that league isn't as great as the strength of the Premier League. But let's jump into the first video that we are watching.
Is 10%. In European football, however, there are less rules. There's also a lot of flexibility in the types of deals that they can do. You can invest in clubs. FSG own the majority of Liverpool, for example, whereas Ares own 34% of Atletico Madrid. You can invest in leagues. CVC invested 1.9 billion euros in La Liga. This got them a board seat and it gave them 8.25% share of a company that manages the revenues of La Liga. Pretty innovative. But you can also invest in revenue streams too. Check this. 6th Street have purchased 25% of Barcelona's revenues for their broadcasting rights in Spain for the next 25 years. In the 2020 to 2021 season, Barcelona received 165 million euros in payment for the domestic broadcast rights that year. Based on those numbers, if that level was to stay the same for the next 25 years, it will probably increase, but for the purpose of this, they'll stay the same. 6th Street will make $40 million annually from the deal. Over 25 years, that will equate to just over €1 billion. For this investment, they've given Barcelona 527 million euros. They're going to almost double their money, and all they have to do is sit back and wait for Barcelona to get paid. Pretty good, huh? So now you know why private equity firms get involved. But how do the clubs benefit? Well, again, there are some pretty notable reasons. The first being, they need the money. I mentioned earlier that private equity companies like buying distressed assets. And around 2020, there were a lot.
Even though a lot of these clubs are operating at higher revenue, making a lot of money, their expenditure is great as well. Most notably, the amount of money they spend in terms of salary on their players. For a lot of clubs, it's like 50-60% of their revenues that they generate is spent on players' salaries and wages. And also then the exorbitant amounts of money being spent in terms of transfer. You have players, just average Premier League players now going for 40, 50, 60 million. Madueke, who is a squad player for Arsenal, was bought for, I believe, 56 million, nearly 60 million. Eze was another 65 million acquisition. And, Zidane in 2001, 2002, cost 50 million euros at the time, right? And that's adjusted for inflation. And because of the amount of money within the league, the quality that they can get is just beginning to get out of control.
Of distressed assets. Let's take Atletico Madrid. Between 2010 and 2020, Atletico Madrid became a force in Spanish football. They rose from being a mid-table club to being one of the best 3 teams in Spain and one of the best teams in Europe. But despite this, a report came out a few years ago which suggested that club debt had reached astronomical levels. They needed private equity to steady.
Because to compete, you need to be able to spend the money. And then once clubs, get overly ambitious and spend that amount of money on players, then they become strapped for cash, and private equity is an easier way to gain money than long-term financing from banks, because banks try to end up staying away from it because they see it as a risky option.
The ship and provide some much-needed capital to reduce that net debt amount. There just simply aren't that many financial institutions out there that have such deep pockets available so quickly. La Liga president Javier Tebas echoed those sentiments too. In a recent interview, he said that 90% of clubs would not have had the resources to continue without that investment into the league from CVC. The good thing is, La Liga structured that deal well. Half of the money that was received from CVC got distributed evenly to all La Liga clubs. There was a mandate that a proportion of that money must be spent on club infrastructure. As a result, we've seen some improvements. Villarreal have a new stadium. Real Sociedad have a new training facility. This helps clubs make more money. This helps clubs attract more talent. Clubs simply would not have been able to do this without the injection of capital from these private equity companies. PE companies are also known for their proficiency in strategic management and administration, and they develop this from all of their.
And the reason for the La Liga investors doing that is because they want to make La Liga as watched as the Premier League, as big as the Premier League, and they do it by producing a better product, by creating better players, by allowing players to train in better surroundings, by giving fans a better match day experience, and investing that money into player development and player acquisition.
Investments in many different industries around the world. Liverpool are an excellent example of this. They were going nowhere under Hicks and Gillette. Little on the pitch success. Rifts behind the scenes. There were even some rumours that Liverpool were going to go into administration at one point. I remember that time. On top of that, in my last video, I got an excellent comment from Delboy0, who, as a Liverpool fan, remembers how they were across the 1980s into the early 2010s. He said, and I'll paraphrase, in the 1980s, Liverpool were the biggest club in England. The Premier League was created in 1992, and this exploded the Premier League across the world, with many people globally interested in English football. Liverpool, however, rejected the global ideology and fell behind relative to clubs like Manchester United in the same time. Liverpool didn't go on global pre-season tours. Rick Parry, the chairman, didn't adopt the global nature of football at that time. And a delta was driven between United and Liverpool. However, FSG came in 2010. Some strategic decision-making came shortly after. The global nature of Liverpool massively improved. Better management decisions and success followed shortly after. Fenway Sports Group are backed by Arctos Partners and Redbird Capital. There's a lot of private equity influence there. And the results in the last 15 years speak for themselves. And that is how fans benefit. More money into a club brings stability. With stability, good decision-making should be downstream from there. If Barcelona had private equity investment sooner, maybe they might not have been such a financial pickle over the last 10 years. Maybe Messi might even still be at the club.
Because these financial institutions are profit-driven, they are trying to increase revenue and maximize their profits, maximize the profit that their assets are producing.
Infrastructure improvements come with that too, and fans benefit from this big time. Silver Lake have invested $500 million in the City Football Group. Lo and behold, the Etihad is now set for a major stadium renovation that will take place very soon. By 2026, 7,000 extra fans will be able to watch Man City week in, week out.
But Man City are struggling to fill its stadium at the moment, okay? Just because all this money is being invested doesn't mean it is allowing global fans to come and watch the game, because local fans are still the main drivers of in-stadium viewing. Because if you're coming from China, America, anywhere around the world to come watch a game, you need to first purchase a ticket, get accommodation, and then spend at least €100, £100 on the actual ticket.
At the Etihad. I mentioned the new Villarreal stadium earlier too. These things lead to success. Success isn't guaranteed, but it's important to remember that that is the aim. There is a perception out there that private equity companies invest in European football clubs. They don't know anything about football, and all they want is money. There is some truth to that. But money and profits are never bad for a company, nor are they bad for...
Let's jump into the other video we're watching.
Resulted in a catastrophe for Bordeaux. Not too long after the acquisition, Bordeaux's performance began to deteriorate, and the club were hemorrhaging cash. This was due to a high cost base and decreasing revenues. In 2022, the club were relegated to Ligue 2, and as of today, they're still competing in the French second division. This is another example where things have gone from bad to worse for all parties involved post private equity involvement. The shareholders currently have a less valuable team than the one they had in 2018. The fans now have a club that's a shadow of its former self. To be honest, things do not appear to be getting any better for the French outfit. Now, with all the bad news surrounding private equity ownership of European football clubs, why is private equity interested in European football? Private equity firms are interested in European football clubs because they think they can realize value from them at some point in the future. But to realize value from a football club, a private equity firm would first have to do a number of things. These include selling assets in the club. This could be tangible assets like the stadium, or intangible assets like the playing squad. But there's an issue with this. The playing squad you need to play, so there's only so many players an owner can sell. Also, the training ground and stadium are assets that only have a use to a handful of potential buyers. Oftentimes, these assets are zoned such that they can't be used for anything other than sporting activity, which further limits their saleability. Another method to increase the value of a club is cost reduction. This typically involves lowering headcount, cutting wages, and/or purchasing materials from cheaper suppliers. But just like selling assets, a private equity firm would struggle to cut costs. As income has increased in the top 5 leagues, so have player and staff wages. The more a club spends on player wages, the more likely it is to finish in a higher league position. Now, if a private equity firm tries to cut back on player wages, whilst other clubs continue to pay their players a premium, there's a real likelihood that a club may fail to compete and/or even be relegated.
And that is one big problem that Arsenal Football Club faced under Arsene Wenger. At the time, because it was financing its stadium, it wasn't able to splurge money on transfers and wages, which means that clubs like Chelsea and Manchester City came along and were able to outcompete Arsenal, and Arsenal was relegated to just being a top four club, getting top four each year, and eventually even falling out of that because less success drives more. Less success drives less success, basically, right? And more success drives more success. Let's jump in back to the tactical side.
Still have your doubts. So let's take an even deeper dive into the numbers, not from a general league to league point of view, but from a quality and talent point of view. Because the best way to decide which is the strongest league in the world is to see which one has the highest quality games, week in, week out. Someone once joked that Messi couldn't do it on a cold, rainy night in Stoke. And at that time, Messi was basically becoming the best version of the best player the sport's ever seen. So I don't think he was being completely serious. But what he meant was that the Premier League has a level of physicality, intensity and grit from top to bottom, which separates it from any other league in the world. And he might have been onto something. The Premier League last season had by far the fewest passes per shot compared to the other four leagues. Coupled with one of the shortest passing distance averages and the quickest time to pass, leads to the most sharp, ultra-fast and demanding level of football. Out of possession, teams need to press constantly, while facing quick and frequent short passes, while the opposition waits for openings.
So the Premier League is incentivizing less technically capable players, but more athletically driven players.
Then, in the final third, teams need to defend against excessive shooting and direct attacks on goal. And the pace doesn't just come in the final third. The average speed of players in the Premier League dwarfs the other leagues. Players sprint more, sprint faster and sprint longer distances, and they just move more in general. Premier League players are sprinting for 2.68% of the time, compared to a 2.4% in the second place Serie A. This might not seem like much, but over the course of a whole season, it really adds up. If you don't want to take my word for it, just listen to countless Premier League players and managers that have admitted how the jump in intensity is so prevalent. Ekitike and Slot have already come out this season and addressed the physicality, and they've only been here for a year or so. Cucurella, who's had seasons of experience in La Liga, stated that the Prem is just a level above, and the physicality and speed mean that you just have to think faster in every moment. Obviously, this isn't the story in every single game, but these trends are more evident across the length of it.
However, unless the Premier League teams are able to get more bigger squads who can deal with the physicality of the Premier League, you're going to see more injuries to players, shorter careers, and then once you have that, in Premier League starts losing its power relatively compared to other leagues, you might even see more player protection come in if that is the case.
The season, and it explains why the pace and intensity of the Prem proves so difficult for so many foreign players. It seems to go without saying that most big transfers into the Prem end up falling short of their expectations, especially when they come from foreign leagues across Europe. Big money signings that can't adapt to the league in one way or another and end up falling to the bench or being shipped back to Europe for half the price. Recent players that come to mind like Gyökeres, Voltemada and Wirtz haven't been terrible, but you can see how the league has caused some growing pains in the first half of the season.
Yeah, someone like Gyökeres scored like 60 odd goals for Sporting Lisbon last year, and this season so far he has scored, I believe he's on like 8 goals in the league. So 6 goals in the league, but 8 goals overall.
And these are players who have really shone in the Champions League before. More notable signings back in the day might include Di Maria, Morata or Depay, who look destructive everywhere else they've played, even in World Cup finals, but can never quite get it going in the Prem. The same thing happens in reverse. How many times have we seen someone struggle in the Premier League, go on to have a career breakthrough as soon as they switch leagues? McTominay went from being a scapegoat rotation player for United to the Serie A Player of the Year in just a few seasons. And I'm not saying McTominay didn't always have that potential inside him, but someone who looked like a decent centre mid in England looks like Zidane in Italy. Of course, there's many factors that play into transfers over and underperforming in different leagues: language barriers, cultural adaptation, team chemistry, but there's no doubt that the quality of the league is one of the most important. And the main problem for these overseas players is that this gap in skill, speed and competitiveness is growing faster than ever. Looking back at the previous Opta rankings from last season, the average Premier League team was rated at an 87.9.
And Premier League teams are incentivized to get these more physical players, because one way to stop a technical able team who can pass around you is to physically press them, to close them down, so win the ball back from, so that they don't have the ball, which is why now you have all these teams in the Premier League who have these physical players, these physical squads who could stop you playing football. And therefore, the teams that used to play football, like Manchester City, are now reverting to a more physical approach, just like the rest of the Premier League.
Not too far off the Bundesliga, but this season it's increased to 90.5, whereas the Bundesliga's fallen to an 85. And this makes sense. Bar maybe one or two exceptions, every team has major attacking threats, a competent back line, and a real chance of winning at every stadium in the league. Not to mention the superstars in every team. You might keep Semenyo quiet on a Tuesday night, but then Igor Thiago is tearing you apart on the weekend. And the anyone can beat anyone gimmick isn't, well, a gimmick. This season, every single team has poetically beat a league rival in a beautiful circle of parity. Let's start with the struggling Wolves, who got their first league win of the season the other day against West Ham, a comfortable 3-0 performance. But West Ham beat Newcastle earlier this season 3-1. Newcastle beat Palace 2-0, who beat Liverpool 2-1. Liverpool beat Villa 2-0, who then beat Arsenal 2-1 to hand them one of their only losses this season. Arsenal managed to beat Brentford 2-0, who beat Everton, who beat United. United then beat Brighton 4-2, who beat Man City 2-1. City beat Fulham 5-4 in probably the game of the season, but Fulham could only score one against Sunderland, but they beat them, who then went and beat Bournemouth, who beat Forest. Forest beat Spurs, and Spurs beat Leeds, and even though Chelsea lost to Leeds, they beat Burnley 2-0, and that terrible Burnley side managed to beat Wolves 3-2 to complete the perfect chain. Not only is it insanely impressive and competitive for this to happen only halfway through the season, it's more the fact that all these results are so unpredictable. I genuinely watch games with zero idea of what's about to happen. It's complete box office entertainment. The best part is, it feels like it's come a long way from when City and...
The scores and results are unpredictable, but the structure of the tactics is boring because that is what the investments, the private equity investment within the teams is incentivizing. Okay, it is all about staying profitable, it's all about generating revenue, and the best way to do that is to buy the most physical players to stop the opposition from playing, and you scoring a goal, nicking the win, and gaining staying in the Premier
Liverpool
League.
would destroy everyone and get nearly 100 points every season. And this is why the Prem is really taking the best league in the world crown at the moment. It's always been the most popular, the richest, the highest level of football, but now it's hyper competitive and completely unpredictable. A lot of this comes down to the structure. The skill gap between the best and worst teams, as well as all the teams in between, is so much less significant than it used to be, and the mid-table teams are so much more sustainable than the ones in other leagues. Every year it seems like the Brightons, Brentfords and Bournemouths get raided by the top 6, losing all their star power and looking like relegation favourites. But every season they seem to find and develop even more talent, and look just as good, if not better. I mean, Bournemouth lost most of their back line last season, and were second in the league after 8 weeks. Brentford lost their captain, manager, 2 20-goal-a-season forwards and other key players, and they're competing for Europe. Brighton had a 7-3-2 record against all of the big 6 last season, but then lost most of their games to teams in the bottom half. It's actually unbelievable.
Let's jump back into the original video.
Relegated, its revenues will be severely impacted, as discussed in my video here. This could potentially have a negative impact on the value of a club, as, all else held equal, a club in the top flight will always be perceived as more valuable than a club in the second division. Lastly, the method of value creation, which perhaps is more relevant to the sport of football, is revenue enhancement. This can be achieved by negotiating better deals with sponsors, increasing matchday ticket prices, selling more merchandise, and lastly, doing more live events and concerts at the stadium. Now, after the private equity firm has increased the value of a club, it will look to exit by selling it to another firm for an amount greater than the one which was paid. This is what the Elliott Group did with AC Milan. There is a catch-22 though. Nearly all of the things listed above require success on the field to achieve. Sponsors will only pay more if you play well and finish in a higher league position. Fans will only accept higher ticket prices for a better quality of football. And fans will only buy more merchandise if the team is worth supporting. Since almost all revenue enhancement is driven by performance, and better performance is linked to buying more expensive players and paying them more, the benefit of owning a European football club doesn't seem to be immediately apparent.
This is why it is basically scavengers eating the Premier League, destroying the football, because they are chasing profits, but the the demand for it, the customer base, the fans are only willing to pay those prices and tolerate those prices if the product that they are being sold is of a high quality. And I think long term wise, private equity won't allow that to happen. They will understand that basically that you just have to throw so much money at the problem to acquire these players that they won't be able to keep up, and they will be pulling out their funding.
But there are other ways that private equity firms can benefit themselves by owning football clubs outside of a buy low and sell high strategy. Remember, as discussed in my video, Why Taylor Swift Hates Wall Street, a private equity firm is one that raises funds from investors to acquire businesses with the aim of selling the acquired businesses for more money at some point in the future. The investors in a private equity fund are typically pension funds, high net worth individuals, family offices, endowments.
And this ties back into what we discussed in most of our other videos about how elites are controlling the world, how elites are draining money and resources from, other people, from other businesses, and that we are heading towards a big financial crash, a big stock market crash, a big financial crisis, where a lot of people will lose their money in their pension funds, and that will be a big effect on ordinary people.
And insurance companies. As well as buying and selling businesses, private equity firms make money from fees. They charge the investors in the fund fees for assets under management. So the more assets under management, the more they'll earn in fees. They also charge the clubs they own management fees. For what exactly though? I have no idea. They also earn performance fees based on the performance of assets in the fund. So as you can see, if executed correctly, a football club can serve as nothing more than a vehicle through which private equity firms can generate millions in fees. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some success stories with private equity ownership of football clubs. Liverpool is an example of private equity ownership that's worked out for both the shareholders and the fans. Since Fenway Sports Group acquired the club in 2010, Liverpool have won the Premier League and the Champions League. The club has also finished runner-up in both competitions. Unlike the situation at Chelsea, Liverpool fans and shareholders have reason to celebrate. The club for the most part has remained profitable, and the club's value has increased under Fenway Sports Group.
And because the value has increased, they are more likely to be selling off the assets for a profit. Let's go back into the original video.
What's interesting from here is where this trend goes in the future. My take is as follows. The latest round of broadcasting rights across Europe are great, but they've shown a slowdown in growth that we've seen in previous broadcast cycles. In France, it went backwards. With broadcast revenue being such a major income source for clubs, does the reduced growth potential make it less appealing for private equity companies? In addition, a lot of the private equity investments that happened around 2020 will come to a light around 2025, 2026, 2027. That's when they reach their target 5 to 7 year time frame. Will they look to exit those positions? When investing in traditional companies, that's always a target window. Does that match with football clubs? It's going to be fascinating to see what kind of deals they look to do to get out of their positions when that time comes. The final thing that intrigues me is the governance that private equity companies have on the game. CVC, for example, made a lot of money with Formula One. A big driver of the growth in Formula One was the introduction of cost caps. This made spending a lot more universal, linear, and easier to forecast for the Formula One teams. And in turn, this allowed a lot more growth for the business and for the teams themselves. A stronger imposition of them maybe might come into the game. Similarly, another thing that private equity loves in sport is closed leagues with cost caps and closed.
And private equity would love to bring a American style ownership model to the to European clubs, to European football, which is why you saw a couple of years ago a big push for the creation of the Super League, a Super European League, which is closed off, which will have the best teams across Europe competing in a closed league style MLS, NFL style league, which will increase more revenues for the clubs involved.
In the top flight. The Championship is sometimes labelled as the best league in the world for the same reasons: complete unpredictability. It might not get the same coverage or hype, but the stats really back it up. If we revisit the Opta Power rankings from earlier, the Championship has the smallest range between the best and worst club, at just 9 metric points. And Liga is actually closer to the Championship in terms of skill level than it is to the Prem. To put this into perspective, the Eredivisie had a range of 24, and if we compare them visually, only the 3 best Dutch teams are better than the best Championship team, and the worst Dutch team are as good as Bromley, a strong League 2 side, or the Barcelona B team. By the end of every Championship season, the middle of the table is a war zone, and there's always drama on the last day. This means that decade-defining events are decided by the finest of margins. You have teams lose the playoff final and crumble to non-league, whereas the winners will be established in the Premier League in the next few years. Forest beat Huddersfield in the 2022 playoff final, and they're playing in Europe, whereas the Terriers are struggling to escape League One. But one thing which is impossible not to mention is arguably the main reason that we're talking about how amazing the Premier League has become in the first place. Money. The Prem is a financial giant. Its broadcasting deal has recently passed over €4 billion, more than the other 4 leagues combined. Not to mention this was a 16% increase from the previous deal, whereas leagues like the Serie A and Liga are actually losing money on their current deals. The Premier League wage bill is higher, the club's owners are richer, the revenue is ridiculous. Premier League players on average get paid £3.2 million per year, much more than any other league. The Prem genuinely dwarfs everyone else from a commercial point of view. It even brings the most fans to each game, with the Championship and League One both being top 10 worldwide leagues in terms of attendance. But with all this money came a problem, and there was a stigma that you could just buy your way to the top. Man City are a prime example. Chelsea have spent billions and basically paid for European football, and even newer teams like Newcastle and Villa are benefiting from huge investment. But this season just feels different. Liverpool spent nearly 500 million, and somehow got worse. Clubs are spending and big signings are coming into the Prem, but many are struggling. Spending seems to have lost some of its power. Obviously,
Yeah, because you're seeing all this inflation caused by the Premier League to players. Some of the quality isn't working out as they hoped. A big reason for the tactics being so boring is because they are all trying to make their positions in the Premier League permanent, to make European football for themselves permanent, which is why they are so overcoached, overstructured, in order for them to predict, basically, which is what private equity firm loves to do. They love to predict its profit, predict its Premier League position, and that they are trying to predict their way into a profitable future for when they can sell their shares. But that is it for today. Thank you for listening, and I will see you tomorrow.